If someone asked you exactly what a conductor does, how would you answer?
It's the same thing I say to my students at Central Washington University. I start by saying that the conductor is a conduit, not only musically, but through community as well. He or she has to embody Debussy or Mahler or Mozart and show what that looks like visually so that the musicians can reflect that. At the same time, the conductor is also a conduit between artists and stage and the audience behind. So it's a pretty big job.
So what are the skills most essentially required of a conductor?
Well, it's funny, the musical skills, the technical skills, being able to do a 4 pattern, a 3 pattern, be able to diagnose and correct errors, all that really turns out to be 1% of the job, although it's absolutely essential to understand the instruments of the orchestra and the style of composers and form and structure. But the other part of it is just being a good manager, managing the library, managing musicians, managing personnel, managing programs, and trying to advocate for music in the community.
Speaking of community, you have taken many community orchestras to new levels of performance. It's a wow. For example, the Wenatchee Valley Symphony, which now plays in a performing arts building instead of the local high school. I mean, what are you doing that works to enhance orchestras and build audiences?
Right. Wenatchee experienced an incredible renaissance when I started there. A lot of them had experience going home after rehearsals slumped and sad. I think I just believe that everyone deserves the opportunity to be expressive, to express themselves through music, whether they're 2 years old or 100 years old, whether they've studied their music at a conservatory or if it's just a hobby and they're an amateur. And so I think that's what we concentrated on at Wenatchee, is that the love for music and to create beautiful music together. And that energy actually permeates beyond the stage, and the community finds that very, very engaging.
A couple of things about working with an orchestra. Is there a set of signs or nonverbal communication between you and the orchestra?
I think it's just unique to the conductor. I mean, there are some universal signs, like I can show you my hand, that really means stop, and I can show you my hand this way, and it means more, and I could show a sad face or a happy face. Those are very sort of universal things. But I am built a certain way. I'm a certain height, and I have a certain wingspan. I don't look like James Levine. I don't look like Gustavo Dudamel. So part of our job is to find our physical vocabulary. What physically can I do that means something and elicits a response from the musicians?
Do things happen in the actual performance that go differently than they did during rehearsal?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, probably most of my best performances happen at that dress rehearsal or somewhere along the rehearsal process. When you have that extra anxiety, when you have the audience there, all of a sudden there's a little bit more pressure, and so it jacks up the excitement. But numerous things that you've never seen before: dropped bows, dropped chin rests, a swab getting stuck in the oboe, forgetting to switch to a B flat clarinet rather than an A clarinet. All these things provide, are very, very exciting.
You have pre-concert talks when you discuss the works to be played. How does that affect the audience's experience?
Right. I try to give a little bit of background to the music, and not in such an esoteric sense, but just give them something to listen for. It's not a music theory lecture at all, but it's where did this music come from? What were these composers' compositional devices? What kind of things did they do? And what is our orchestra doing to try to execute those devices.
Well, how do you decide what the composer's intention was?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm still discovering that. I've only been conducting for, I'd say, 10 years. And, my way I did Beethoven 10 years ago is way different than I've done today. So every time I come to these composers, I'm trying to discover what their style is. And so I read about Beethoven, I look at his manuscripts. I'm a chamber musician myself. I'm a pianist, so I play Beethoven. And through all those experiences, I can say, this F major here is is congruent to the other F major in that other piece, and the F major in that other piece, or the piano in this piece is the same dynamic as a piano in this piece. So those things are come with experience. But still, today I'm still discovering new things that I'd never thought of before.
In interpreting the works of living composers, is it different? What insights does working with living composers give you into interpreting the works of past composers and vice versa?
Well, living composers are interesting. Nowadays, composers are very specific in their print about what they want. They say, not so fast, put your bow down here, retune your string. This is a piano, not a pianissimo. There's so much more specific information today than, say, in Bach's time, where he had no dynamics or no tempo markings. And I've also had the opportunity to work with, to actually talk with living composers when I'm doing their piece. And it's surprising what they say. They're not as rigid as you might think. They mark, quarter note equals 88 as a tempo marking, and you go into that rehearsal and you try to nail that right on the dot, and you ask them, what do you think of that? It's too slow or it's too fast. So they are, as creative people, are still thinking about how their piece should be improved upon.
So there is a dynamic between you trying to interpret for them and them reinterpreting what they were doing.
Right. Of course, there's these external factors like the level of your orchestra, how big your hall is, how resonant it is. That has an impact on tempi. Whether it's sandwiched between two other living composer pieces, or if it's compared against a Beethoven symphony, for example. Those have impacts.
Do you see an evolving pattern in musical interpretation over the last century or so? For example, there was a rush in the beginning of the 70s, I think, toward authentic performance using the very sorts of pianos and instruments the musicians at the time would have played on.
Right. From Beethoven backwards, this is a rising trend to use smaller orchestras, to use more fleeting tempi, to use period instruments, the trumpets that don't have valves, the horns that don't have valves. In fact, Brahms wrote in his symphonies, even though the valved horns existed, he wanted the natural horns in his symphonies. I like that approach. I like that it feels like you're driving a Mini rather than driving a Hummer. So I like being able to turn corners quickly in classical and Baroque rep. And I really admire those composers or those conductors and orchestras who strive to achieve that period sound.
In fact, I was wondering, do audience seem to respond to more innovative or stricter construction of the composer's intention? I'm really, more than just the authentic performance and original instrument thing, is there a tendency to be more romantic or uncommittal or vice versa now? What works with audiences?
I mean, the great, all our recordings that we grew up on in the middle of the 20th century were these romantic conductors, Karajan, slow tempi for Beethoven, slow, drawn-out Wagners and Mahlers. And so I think audiences are tolerant of these new period approaches because they have a fresh flavor to them. They're speedy. And in our sort of very fast lifestyle, I think that's very appealing to our audiences.
That brings me to a couple of questions, if you don't mind. I want to talk about classical music's future. There is the full, complete, seductive, and involving quality to live music, which is inevitably missing in anything electronic. So it seems something of a paradox that electronic music is displacing live. Are you worried that audiences are slipping away, that classical music is losing its relevance?
I'm not worried. In fact, I'm encouraged that these recordings are so readily available that you can sit in the park, you can sit anywhere, and find these recordings. You can listen to Stockhausen or Glass or Adams or Bach anywhere you want. And I don't think it's ever going to replace the live experience. I think, if anything, it's going to get someone excited about coming here, because for me, and I think for the musicians in the audience, what we do today at 3 p.m. for our concert will never be repeated. Only the people in this room, on this stage, on the podium, will experience that together. I think that's a very unique and captivating thing. I don't think that will ever die.
How many significant young composers are there? We're already familiar with some gaining reputation like Aaron J. Kernis and others like Rebecca Clark. But what about the rediscovery of some recent composers like William Grant Still, some of whose works are beginning to gain recognizable popularity?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much repertoire out there. Um, Today I'm interested in finding the Mozarts of our time, and there are several out there. I think John Adams is one of them. I think Jennifer Higdon is one of them. I think Thomas Addis, who comes from the UK, is one of them. I think I hope that we can celebrate them and uplift them in our time as much as possible. But sometimes these things have a gestational period. It's not until later, after they've passed, perhaps, that we're able to really value their works. Mahler, for example, during his time was not very popular. It took 50 years, really, before Bernstein championed his works and with Vienna, and now it's such a standard of our repertory. So it's an interesting thing.
You sound so much more hopeful about the future of classical music than perhaps so many others are. They're really worried about it. They factor it into their plans.
Yeah, the business end of it is complicated. I think that's what's holding everyone back, and there's a disconnect between musician and administration and board. I think that needs to be solved. But I think art, for art's sake, I think is going to last forever. I would like to write a letter to the president and say, we need a secretary of culture in the United States, someone that uplifts the arts and it makes it a value, a necessary value.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your taking the time before performance today.
Thank you very much.